Hello, dear colleagues and friends in Japan. It's my great honor and pleasure to congratulate you on the achievements that we jointly have achieved since the inception of the Global Sepsis Alliance in 2010. And the greetings come from Berlin, from the headquarters of the Global Sepsis Alliance. The importance of our contribution to the field of sepsis is so important that because sepsis may hit everybody, independently of rich, poor, famous, and it hits even more so in resource-limited countries. And what Sir William Osler has set out around 1900, that humanity had but three great enemies, but by far famine and war and fever, and but by far the greatest of those is terrible, is fever. And what he said at this time still is true, you can depict from the fact that in the meanwhile that there are over 10 million deaths annually from sepsis, and even more deaths if you look at the excess death rates from COVID-19, which indeed is also the most common cause is sepsis. And we have set out also already this fact during the adoption of the World Sepsis Resolution in 2017, where it was mentioned that not only bacteria but also fungi and especially viruses such as MERS, such as also Ebola viruses and coronavirus may result in sepsis. And Dr. Tedros, the Director General of WHO, rightly has called it a tragedy that most of the deaths from sepsis are preventable. And this has been demonstrated by the strong decrease of the crude mortality rate in the USA, which dropped from 800 per 100,000 population down to around 50 until 1950s and 60s. And this is not only true in the meanwhile, this is still true, this high death toll in low and middle income countries, but the fact that sepsis is preventable has been also demonstrated in high income countries such as Australia, where just by the implementations of measures such as the strong and continuous education of healthcare workers and physicians in the early detection of deteriorating patients, and then by the establishment of so-called rapid response teams, who they may call in case of an urgency hospital-wide. This measure alone resulted in a decrease of the hospital mortality rate from ICU-treated patients from 35% to as low as 18 to 19%. And the measures for it are prevention of infections by vaccination and clean care, early recognition, and especially management of sepsis as an emergency. And sepsis is not only the primary or one of the primary causes of deaths, but also, as rightly it was pointed out by EU Commissioner Dr. Andriukaitis, who rightly pointed out that it's also the most common, sepsis is the most common cause of disability in Europe. And I mention this because we have to learn that the best measure to achieve this goal is by a whole society approach, and this was demonstrated in the field of cancer, and also by the involvement of high-ranked policymakers. And we had to learn and could learn from the cancer community, who already in the 50s and 60s pointed out and understood that to make a difference, a disease or any illness needs to be transformed politically before it can be transformed scientifically. And they asked rightly a moonshot for cancer, or for a moonshot or a Manhattan Project of cancer. And they said, Mr. Nixon, you can cure in cancer. And if you look at the progress that has been made there, it's enormous by this whole society approach. And jointly, we can grab up and follow up to these achievements. And we have made major progress over the last years, not only by the implementation of the WHO sepsis resolution, but also by the commitment of the G7 Minister of Health in 2020 to encourage the implementation of this resolution on a worldwide scale. And as you know, that only in a few days, we will launch, under the leadership of our esteemed President of the GSA and the esteemed CEO of the GSA, Dr. Mariam Yashi, will launch the 2030 Agenda for Sepsis. And this is another milestone which brings us closer to equal footing with other important global health threats. Thank you for your kind attention, and congratulations again for your great work that you are doing in Kyoto and in Japan overall, which was only possible by the engagement of the Japanese intensive care society and also by the establishment of the Japanese Sepsis Alliance. Thank you, and I wish you a great success for your events around this year's World Sepsis Day.